Hello? That's on? Okay, so this is basically much more of a surprise for me than it is for you. What happened was I made a joke on Twitter, and I was like, you know what I really want to do? I'd love to give a talk about enterprise security based on terrorists, okay? Like snitches, the insider threat. And Eno is like, good, your slot is on day 2. And I'm like, no, that was a joke. And Eno, because he's a German, has a great sense of humor, and he's like, it's too late. Your slot is day 2. So I'm here now. So unfortunately, I kind of had to throw this together at the last minute. So this is not that presentation. I do apologize. I would really, really like to give that talk, but I need more than 24 hours notice to put it together. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a talk called How Very APT, which is about the APT or the cybers. Some of you may have been familiar with these terms. Let me know if I'm going too fast, throwing things out there. Yeah. So basically, like, APT is just a dumbass fucking word that the Americans invented for China. It is. It's Asia-Pacific threat.
Unlike the side prior work, though, Sergey Brodist actually coined that term.
Okay, but no, like that's literally what it meant, and then they backronymed it to advanced persistence. But yeah, so it was for China because the Chinese just didn't give a fuck and they wouldn't stop, right? Like that, they were persistent as hell, and advanced was not quite right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bore everyone, and I am going to make you learn about the intelligence cycle. And one of the things I want to try and do is I want to take APT as this concept and contextualize it within the framework of intelligence collection, espionage, and active measures, okay? So you stop thinking about just like the cyber or like the APT, and you start picturing this is like a department inside of a large organization that's doing shit. And, you know, we have various jokes that come up like, your adversary has a boss and a budget too, right? And that is very, very literally true. That is like actually the way that it works. And if you understand that, you have a better idea of what's going on in the world. I don't know what else I have in here. I think I've got, there's a brief guide on actually how to set up your own APT, which if you have a few $1 million lying around, you know, go for it. Then I've got a thing on cyber intelligence, but the more interesting thing is elements of APT style, where we look at the Americans, the Chinese, and the Russians, and try and put them together as how their operational characteristics are reflections of their organizational makeup. So I apologize. When I was making these slides, I literally only had access to 1970s stock art. So, so literally everything is illustrated with 1970s stock art.
Are there
So,
Stasi pictures?
I do not have any Stasi pictures. I left the Stasi out. But yeah. Oh, no, that was the old one that I had with, fuck. I've given too many presentations. Many years ago, I had, it was illustrated with pictures that were liberated from Stasi headquarters of guys in different disguises. So that was like all of the slides, like how to do OPSEC. And there'd be these guys with these fucking giant Russian hats going like, or like, oh yeah, he's going left.
He had really big hands.
Yeah. So here's the intelligence cycle. And the important thing to remember about the intelligence cycle is that it's complete bullshit. It was invented by the Americans who believe that if you name things, then you understand them. And so they basically took this what's really a very, very messy, holistic thing, and they broke it up into sections, and then they say if we label each of these sections, then we understand intelligence. And that's why they do so amazingly badly at it. One of the reasons. So essentially, you've got tasking. So in theory, the way that intelligence is supposed to work is you have a customer who's going to receive the intelligence that you produce. And they come to you and they say, I would like to know what the capabilities of Russia's next generation fighter is going to be. All right, so that's a clear parameter. You know what you're looking for. You would then have to break that down into chunks. You'd say, all right, so how do we find out who would know this information? You would figure out basically how to get it out, what information you're looking for, like is it going to be the radar capabilities, the flight characteristics, the various other parameters. But this is bullshit because that's not how it works. Because the idea is that the consumer is the policymakers, and policymakers are fucking idiots, right? They don't say like, let me know what I'm going to need to know in 10 years. They say, why didn't you fucking tell me yesterday that I needed to know this shit? You know, like they don't have a long vision of what they want to know, so they don't do good tasking. It's basically left to the Intel community to kind of like figure out what they can do and what they can learn, and then hope that that is going to be useful to the people who will consume it. That's what actually happens. But in the American version, the policymakers make a request. And that's actually true if you think about Boeing or Raytheon. They do make requests. But then you would have to call it economic espionage, which the Americans don't do because they've gerrymandered very, very carefully what counts as economic espionage. And if you're only doing it to produce military weapons or for trade negotiations, it doesn't count. I covered this. So yeah, like basically the idea is you get a request and you have to break it down. You have to figure out how are you going to solve this request that's come in. And the important things to take away from here are capabilities, intent, and opportunity, which is basically how you should always think about threats, right? Like, do they have the capability? Do they have the intent? And do they have the opportunity? So most of the time, like if you're dealing with cyber stuff, pretty much everyone has the capability because they have an internet connection. Pretty much everyone has the opportunity because they have an internet connection. And then it's just down to intent, which is where things get slightly more interesting. So we have our request, then we go out and we do collection. And this is the thing where cyber actually fits into the broader spectrum, the broad scope of intelligence work. And so in theory, you've got this input, which is a request, and you do some sort of thing to fulfill this request. And your output is basically raw data. So if you're doing HumInt, your output is going to be basically audio logs or handwritten notes of interviews with people. If you're doing ImageInt, it's going to be pictures. If you're doing open source int, it's going to be, you know, like Wikipedia. If you're doing like all of these other ones, fucking, like Americans love naming shit, right? So massint is actually interesting. It's like basically that's how you can tell if nukes have been set off, because it just measures like shit has happened, and the only explanation for that shit is nukes. And then you try and figure out how big the yield was based on the shit that happened. And there's like an entire department staffed with people who do that. And obviously they don't get called out of bed very often, unless North Korea is involved. But yeah, like there's just like tons of shit. And okay, so I'm going to throw this out there because I think it's fascinating history. So historically, around the end of the Cold War, I don't know if the Germans remember that. It might not have been such a big deal over here, but it was huge in America. Basically, what happened is when the Cold War ended and all of these spy agencies that had been basically just living on money were like, we need to justify our existence because we don't have an enemy anymore. They were competing with each other for budget, right? And for access to policymakers, which is how they judge internally whether they're doing good work or not. Like that's their measure of success, is how much face time they get with the boss. So what happened is the NSA, which was doing SIGINT, which was like they were literally just listening to radio stuff, right? Like pure signal, whatever. And the CIA were fighting over who was going to do cyber, because this was starting to be a thing and everyone was kind of doing it, but no one sort of owned it. And the CIA was like, look, our job is stealing secrets. Therefore, like cyber should be us because we steal the secrets. And like, let them listen to radio. And like everyone knew that radio was kind of going out. Like it wasn't going to be the big thing. So NSA did this fucking judo move where they said that is correct. We do signals intelligence. And cyber is actually signals at rest before they have been transported somewhere. So it is ours. And via SIGINT at rest, NSA got cyber. And the CIA is still pissed about that 30 years later. Like, they're like, the motherfuckers, like that was ours, we had it. So as we've recently found out, the CIA still does have a cyber division, but it's very, very small in comparison to what NSA does. And NSA doesn't listen to as much radio as they used to. That is a lot of time to talk about nothing. Okay, so analysis is actually where it gets much more interesting. So HUMINT is where it's particularly difficult because you're dealing with people and people are fucking assholes and they will lie to you, particularly when they are spies. Like when you're training them to like go and steal stuff from their employer and give it to you, they are in a frame of mind where like they might want to give you what makes you happy, even though it's not necessarily what's true. So that could lead to problems, like they will tell you what you want to hear, and that could be, sometimes it's cultural as well, right? Like in different cultures, they have different ways of interacting with people. So analysis is where you try and take all of this raw data that's being collected and try and figure out how close it is to being bullshit, right? And the more likely it is to be bullshit, the less weight you put on it. And then the more likely it is to being true, the more weight you put on it. Then you combine it with everything else you know, and you kind of fucking shake it around. And if you're lucky, you end up with what's called product. And product is basically a very, very well-written essay that no one ever reads more than the first 2 lines of, right? So they spend fucking ages producing these like 34-page reports where the executive summary is the only thing that anyone will ever see. And like one of the jokes about the CIA was like, there's a lot of very good writing that covers very bad thinking. So basically dissemination is the final part of this intelligence cycle. And in theory, dissemination is supposed to feed back into tasking. So what you have learned from your product now is supposed to tell you what you should try and learn about further on. But again, that's bullshit because it's like just a huge mess. You try and learn as much as you can all the time. The only 2 interesting things here is that I want to point out that all of what's happened up until now, the tasking and the collection and the analysis, are basically constants for regular intelligence work, as well as active measures, which is where you try and affect the state of the world around you. And the Russians are very fucking good at that. And then the only thing that sort of differentiates that is the dissemination angle, right? So the Americans classify the fuck out of everything and then they only give it to a few people, whereas the Russians change a little bit and then they put it on WikiLeaks or RT, whichever. So more stock art. So if you wanted to build your APT, like it's a lot of people are like, well, I know how to hack. I can APT just like anyone else. Like, how hard can it be, right? And the thing is, like, when you're dealing at nation state level, it's actually really, really expensive very, very quickly. So the elements that go into putting together an APT are the stuff that anyone who does regular red teaming should be aware of, like penetration testing, like you need to actually get into boxes. But then you need to do exfil, which is very unusual for a red team. Like if you're actually exfilling data, that's not a thing that happens. You need to probably have some covert infrastructure, which again, red teams usually don't give a fuck about because like, not that they ever get caught, but even if they do get caught, they're legally allowed to be doing that. They're supposed to be doing it. Red teams don't ever do analysis. Like that's not part of the job. Like they're not trying to extract information from the target. Whereas if you are an actual APT, that's a thing you need to do. And management, which is overhead that no one ever likes to talk about. So the penetration stuff, like it sounds really, really simple and straightforward, and it's actually kind of not. Because like you have to have like all of these fucking things that like, yes, you could just download Nmap, but then you're going to be known as like the APT that uses Nmap, and that's kind of embarrassing. So you're probably going to want to outsource it to like one of your local companies to build a port scanner that can be distributed across a wide blah, 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 blah. And then once you've done that, it's going to get caught by fucking F-Secure or some other asshole, and they're going to burn the whole thing in like a APT develops, interesting scanning technology, and then you have to build another one, and it's like a fucking endless pain in the ass. And that's just for port scanning. And then like your exploits, typically you don't really need them except for initial entry. Once you're in, you just move laterally with stolen credentials. And then the other thing is, because like the scanning and the exploiting is a fucking pain in the ass, it's expensive, and it's where you're most likely to get caught. You need implants that you can leave behind, which again, red teams don't typically do unless they're really, really evil. So you have to then develop all of these malware families, and then you have to maintain backwards compatibility as you add new features, and you have to have like infrastructure that supports that, which means you have to have developers, which means you have to have management for them, and on and on and on. And then all of this other infrastructure that you're running has to be maintained. So you need sysadmins, and then you need people cleaning things up, and you need to have operators who are actually just doing the clicky in front of this stuff. And so all of this is very, very expensive, which I probably just spoke about the wrong slide. So where most of your money ends up going is you have to do R&D and maintenance. And R&D is actually not as big of a fucking deal as maintenance. Like, who here has developed software? Yeah? Like, everyone hates fucking maintenance, right? Like, it's the same thing for APTs. Like, their stuff is more likely to fail because there's an upgrade in an OS than because they get found by security software, right? Like your big threat is that everyone decides to move to Windows 10 all of a sudden, right? Like that's going to screw you much more than everyone fucking installs Kaspersky. So you've got like your R&D where you try and develop new stuff so you can stay ahead of the game. Most of the fucking money is going into like keeping your existing stuff working and like patching it and like dealing with fucking backwards compatibility, and then like some idiot is running it, and it's like, oh, it turns out these guys never went from Windows 7, and like, they've got 3 Vista boxes doing AD, and like you never fucking backported it to Vista, so how are we supposed to maintain access? And like all of this shit, that takes huge amounts of time and money, and it's a real pain in the ass. And then once you've got all of that working, you're also hiring new people, and you have to train them on how to use your set of tools, right? And again, that takes money. And then all of that has to actually run on something. So you're probably stealing a huge amount of passwords. And you're going to have password cracking. And everyone's like, oh yeah, Hashcat, that's great. And it's like, yeah, but you're a nation state. So like you want to have racks of fucking GPUs. And you can only put about like 8 GPUs in one box. But you can really buy a lot of GPUs with money. Like, so you end up having to have like racks and racks of GPUs to do cracking. And then you need people who have to sysadmin that and then find out like when one of the GPUs goes bad and replace it. And like, again, it costs money and time. Like building APTs is not exactly the same thing as downloading Metasploit, is what I'm getting at. Okay? Like like you cannot download your way to feature parity with Fort Meade. Like you have to invest proper money. Like Dave Vitale likes to say, you need to invest enough for like an aircraft carrier. That's bullshit. You only need about a submarine's worth of money. You know, and a diesel one at that, not even a real one. So, and then you end up with all this other stuff that we've seen as well. Like your internal infrastructure has to have source repos. Like NSA still uses SVN, which is really embarrassing, but like the cost of doing an upgrade is too much for them, so they're stuck with SVN. And it's not like they can use GitHub with like, we'll just buy the private option, right? You know, so all of this stuff ends up costing lots of money because you have to do it yourself, and every single country has to duplicate that. And this is only to get you into systems and keep you access to it. You then need all of this other shit. Like you're going to need to have your own bounce boxes because you're not going to use Tor because Tor is run by the Americans, basically. So it's a little bit, you wouldn't trust it to be the only thing keeping your APT safe. You need, let's see, like if you're doing phishing, like pretty much everyone else, you're going to need servers to do your spamming from. You're going to need email accounts, right? You're probably going to need someone registering email accounts and setting up shell companies and doing all of this other stuff. That's a massive pain in the ass. If you're running implants, which you have to do, you need dump sites so you can actually have somewhere to take all of that take and put it, which is where all of the threat intel companies get their intel from, right? Everyone knows this, that like, the way that threat intelligence works is you hack the dump sites of the APTs, and then you go and you say, all right, the French are getting their asses handed to them. And then you can go to the French and be like, listen, we have got a proposition for you. We suspect that an APT group may have access to, let's see, this part of your network. And then the French tell you to fuck off because they're French. And
You're on strike.
yeah, they're like, no, it's afternoon. Like, we've already done 30 hours this week. Come back next week. And yeah, anyway, so like that's kind of like how it all works. Like you end up with these huge amounts of infrastructure that need to be managed. External infrastructure, internal infrastructure, software tool chains. And then, because you're hauling in huge amounts of fucking trash, right? You're like anyone who has ever worked at a corporation knows how much garbage accumulates on file servers. Like anyone who's read through the Snowden docs knows that as well. Like just how much shitty fucking PowerPoints and whatever are lying around. And you need to go through all of that information and try and extract something useful, which means you probably need to build Google inside your APT. And that allows you to take terabytes of data and search for things that are interesting, and then mix and match it together. And because if you're doing actual espionage, there's a very, very high likelihood that the people that you're hacking didn't go to the effort of writing it in your language. They probably use their own, like assholes. So you have to so you have to translate all of that shit into your own native language so that your analysts can deal with it, right? And this is one of the areas that the Americans get their asses handed to them, because the only way that they can translate things out of Pashto and Arabic is by hiring like Pashtuns and Muslims. And then it turns out that like sometimes they have divided loyalties, or like they're not super thrilled with the way that the administration is going, etc. But so having translators is a critical part, and it can actually be very, very, very expensive to get it done. When we get to it, we'll see like the Chinese actually have 2 feeder schools that they use for just one APT group. So one feeder school does tech, and the other one is a language school, right? They actually need 2 universities to supply a single APT group. So you process and you sort and you search and you curate, and somehow you're able to produce something out of the muck, out of like all the shit that you pull out of people. And this is critical because the important thing is that data is useless without context, right? You have to be able to contextualize all the data you have, put it together, and say like, this is what we can project based on what we know, and here are the reasons why. And then someone has to get paid more than everyone else, and that's why you have management. And you end up needing, what I find most interesting is targeting, but you end up with managers who have to run the ops teams and figure out how the campaigns are going to work. You end up with people who have to run the R&D teams. You end up with people who have to do, they have to run the analysts. Then, people who have to run above all of that. So you end up with these huge hierarchies of just maintenance management to try and control all of this craziness underneath, which is basically to say you actually need a company, right? Like you cannot just APT with a couple of people. You need a lot of people to have a very, very small number of hackers hacking. Is there anything else on here that's interesting? Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about targeting. So targeting is actually the most interesting part of an APT, as far as I'm concerned. Targeting is where you decide who you're going to hack, right? Like anyone can hack basically anyone. That's what we learned from Stuxnet, is that anything is hackable. But deciding what is worth hacking is far more interesting. So one of the ways that the Russians have been particularly clever is that they have gone after contractors in the US system, and they hack contractors specifically because contractors tend not to be true believers. They don't have the same sort of security work ethic as the real government people. And so by targeting that, they're able to get a lot of interesting information that gets leaked to what's not even a fucking wiki. And that's how it all works, right? Like you have to do your targeting. Like OPM was brilliant targeting by hitting Anthem, which supplies the health insurance for pretty much all of the government employees, including the CIA, and by hitting OPM, which only does clearances for not the CIA. You can then diff those 2 sets of people, and you can see they have government health insurance, they're not in the OPM set, and they show up saying that they're like the first secretary to like the vice consul. Maybe he's lying, So targeting, I think, is much more interesting than hacking. Like being able to figure out what to hit to get you the information that you want is far more cool than hitting something. So, the cyber intelligence. I will briefly cover what everyone does. So this is the everyman cyber intelligence. Obviously, yeah, sorry. Like I said, I literally only had 70 stock art and IRA pictures, and yeah. So because, as we just went over, you need massive amounts of infrastructure and it's very expensive, everyone that's playing cyber ends up doing this mix of public and private sectors, right? So you have the private sector that will provide hosting to people in exchange for looking the other way. That happens everywhere. The US likes to pretend like we don't do that, and that's bullshit. They're like, oh, those Russians with their evil bulletproof hosting, and the Americans have got fucking bulletproof hosting as well from companies that, you know, shouldn't be named, etc. But yeah, like most of the stuff that happens is it turns out it gets very, very expensive to produce this stuff, and the way that private companies can compete is by paying people more money to work for them, and that doesn't work very well for the public sector. Like, you can't give people raises all the time, so people tend to migrate out of the public sector into the private sector, which means you kind of have to give more of the workload to the private sector to compensate for the fact that all of your own people left. And that can bite you in the ass really badly, which happened to the US. It didn't happen to the Russians because the Russians are evil fuckers, and they just like, they're like, you can work wherever you want, we'll still break your fingers. But yeah, like typically what happens is like, even regardless of how much private sector outsourcing you do, the guys who actually like clicky, the hacky, those are still government employees, because that's legally what it has to be, typically. That's not a hard and fast rule, but that's just sort of typically what happens. So then if we want to talk about how we could categorize APTs, we can talk about command and control, which is how tight or how loose they are to the executive. So in theory, intelligence as a community is supposed to be like the will of the executive. Right? The executive says, like, if I can find out this thing or like make that shit happen, and the intelligence community does that. But it depends very much how tightly that's controlled. So Iran has got incredibly tight control, and China has got incredibly loose control. Part of the reason that China has very, very loose control is plausible deniability, right? They allow the intelligence services to basically do their own thing, and all that happens is the executive issues these like, over the next 5 years, China will compete strongly in these areas: stealth, nano, biotech, and, you know, renewables. And then everyone will be like, okay, that's what we need to hack, right? And they'll go out and do it. Whereas like Iran is going to be like, hack that motherfucker. Then we could look at how much they care about covertness or ghosting. So some people are like really, really big on like not getting caught, and some other people couldn't care less. And then you could look at how good they are at cyber, and that's basically, I'll skip the fucking 14-year-old jokes, but you can basically say like, these guys have got really, really high quality stuff versus these guys downloaded Metasploit. Okay? So, elements of APT style. I literally just went over this, so I'm going to skip that. Again, it's like cyber competency, C2, and covertness. So China. The easy way to tell it's China is like, there's loads of them, and they're all doing the same thing. Like they're just bang, 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 bang. I Googled that one, by the way. That's why it's not 70s stock art. I'll be polite. So their competency is tiered. They actually do have incredibly capable and highly competent teams. They just don't use them. They use the other guys, right? As I said, their command and control is very, very loose. What happens is, because the executive doesn't want, like they know NSA is all up in their shit. Like they know that they're hacked backwards and forwards, that all of their phone calls are getting recorded. They don't want to have a record of, you know, can you tell them to please go and hack stealth technology. Instead, what they do is public statements, and then they leave it up to the intelligence organizations to figure out what exactly to do, which makes it very sort of loose. And like when they say, okay, we have to stop now, then the IC is kind of like, do we really? Like, is that like public? Oh yeah, you know, we're gonna stop, honest, or was that like a direct order to stop? So it's a bit loose. And then covertness, again, this is tiered. So they actually do have some really highly competent people doing what would be called preparing the battlefield. So they're going out and they're hacking things and they're leaving implants so that should they ever need to do like cyber war, like the Americans imagine it, they can do it. But most of the time they don't care. So the awesome thing that the Chinese did is they innovated a way to wash data out of the intelligence community into the private sector. And they did it with these things called fusion centers. And these fusion centers are public, and their express purpose is to improve collaboration between the public and the private sector to help China become better at random technology stuff. And what will happen is there'll be one of these loose tasking things, like go out and, like, China is now going to learn nano. We're going to be top of the world at nano. So they will have a fusion center conference where they will get all of the local nano companies, and they'll say, who the fuck is good? Like, who's the best in the world? What do you need? We will do that. And the companies will say, well, like, hit these guys, and we need information on this research. Okay? That goes back. The 3PLA fucking F5s until they finally, like, get something that goes in. You know, like, they run all their shit. They get the stuff back. They have another conference, and they're like, hey, I'm just going to show you some slides that I happen to have found lying around on someone else's file server. And they wash the information back into the public. And that's something that the Americans cannot do. Like, they don't have a good way of declassifying data down. Like, they can't wash it back in, which is why the Chinese are able to do really good economic espionage, is they figured out how to declassify information properly. Blah, 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 loose tasking, fusion centers. Oh yeah, and like the Chinese have this like collect it all mentality, like they just grab everything because the guys doing the clicky don't know what the fuck's going on, so they just take whatever they can find. And as I said, there's basically, just in Shanghai, there's 2 feeder schools. One of them is Jiangtong, and the other one, I believe, is Sisu. And like the Chinese are awesome. Like, their spy school is called the University of Contemporary International Relations. Okay, so they actually do have some really highly skilled teams. And you can see this in Keen Team and Tencent, Pangu. Like, they have basically, nowadays they just dominate on bugs. And these guys are like not even involved in cyber, right? They're just basically straightforward private sector stuff. The other thing that the Chinese do quite a lot of is political espionage. Like, they're very concerned about what certain groups think about them or are planning, which the Americans do a lot of as well, but they, you know, basically need to own up to it. And the Chinese don't really care that much about getting caught. Whereas the Americans, who like basically try and look like super cool, like no one would believe that I work for the CIA. I've got my fucking 5.1s and I'm like staring directly at someone, but I'm wearing sunglasses, so you can't prove it. So like the American approach is like they try and act cool and it fucks them over because they're not. So again, they have this tiered level of competency, and it looks very impressive because they spent so much money on it. But they got really fucked over by the private sector. They spent so much money that all of the good people that they had internally moved to the private sector. And then once they were in the private sector, they kind of drifted away from doing actual operational stuff. And as a result, all they had left was sort of crap. So their command and control, like they like to think they're medium, which is perfect. And what they care about is covertness. Like ghosting is their thing. Like that's what makes them happy. Like the idea for the Americans, the perfect operation is one that you never knew happened. Okay. In theory, it's kind of directish. In practice, they just kind of let the IC do what they want, and then they get whatever comes, like they shake the tree and see what falls out. They view espionage not as a way of controlling the world, but a way of understanding the world and preventing surprise. And based on their track record, that has been, well, there have been surprises. Okay, like they're not super good at their job because they lose sight of the ball a lot. They have 1 million people who are cleared. There's a huge community. They've got like 17 agencies that are like competing for budget. They have this false split between domestic and international, and like all of these legal things that they follow, which they try and tell themselves makes it like pure spying and not like what the other people do, and they're better at it because they follow rules that they've set up for themselves. And one of the other things, as I said, that screwed them is they've got money, like more money than sense, basically. So they threw huge amounts of money into things. And where this really fucked them is when they started out, they said, okay, let's assume everything is an edge case. So let's assume that every time we need to hack someone, it's going to require a 0 day. And because we assume it's always going to be a hard target and it's always going to be an edge case, we're going to need a really, really high quality, very, very covert, very, very well QA'd edge case scenario. But that means it has to be very, very highly classified. Otherwise, you know, it would leak out. So they classify it very, very highly. And then it gets caught in this feedback loop because they don't really have a good way of taking things down, right? Like once it goes classified, it doesn't come back out, except from the Russians. And like, and this it's like this really bad feedback loop of they always have to have this high level of covertness, which always leads to investing more money and having more O days, which means that they can't use them except in special circumstances, which like it means that they are not as effective as they could be. The other thing I wanted to mention is what I call contractor rot, which I've touched on, and I'm only going to touch on again briefly because I don't know when my slot ends. Okay. Yeah. So basically, there's like Booz, like Booz Allen Hamilton and Raytheon are like the big suppliers. And what happened was initially NSA had like this core group of really good people. And so when Booz and Raytheon had to staff up to provide support, there were really good people who were monitoring these guys. But these guys that they were monitoring were making like 3 or 4 times as much money as the NSA dudes. And so the NSA guys are like, this is bullshit. Like, I'm getting fucking 80, this guy's getting 250. I'm fucking out of here. I'm going to come back at 250. So they moved from doing, from working for the government to working for Raytheon or Booz and getting a much higher salary. And then inside the NSA, they had to take the people who were less competent to now manage these guys who are highly competent. Okay, so that sounded good at first until Booz was like, fuck it. Those idiots don't know what the fuck's going on. We can staff with anyone, right? So they start pulling the good people out and putting shit people in. And because there's no one competent left to monitor who's there, you end up with this internal rot. Like that's happened in the US, it's happened in Canada, it has not happened in GCHQ. Like the UK has kind of avoided it. Australia is avoiding it, but I don't think that's going to last for long. But yeah, so that was contractor rot, and that's a peculiar American phenomenon. Russia, this is the front door to Lubyanka, which is where they shoot people in the basement. And they also have an office building above that. So again, like their competency, like it's kind of tiered. They have some pretty good people. They have a lot of not very good people. Their control is kind of loose. The reason it's loose is that they have historically these competing agencies are literally competing. Okay, like Stalin was terrified that the KGB, which wasn't the KGB back then, he was terrified that there was going to be a coup that was going to be run by the Intel agency. So he made a military intel agency, the GRU. And the idea would be that these two agencies would be fighting each other all the time and wouldn't have enough energy and time to have a coup to take over. And then when it got split even more with FSB, SVR, and GRU, there's, again, this strong competition. And the way that Putin runs things is he's like, I want this to happen. And everyone's like fucking running around trying to make it happen, right? And so they kind of step on each other's toes and whatever. And it's very loose, but what it means is because you have so many competing agencies trying to accomplish the same tasks, it's actually very effective. Right? Like it's better sometimes to have 3 different groups trying to accomplish something than one big group, because they'll try different approaches and one of them might be more successful. And yeah, they really do not give a fuck about covertness. Like semi-covert would be the nice way of putting it. So as I said, they've got this thing where they've got all these multiple competing agencies that go against each other. One of the clever things that they did is they have what I call the strategic cyber reserve. So basically they allow any Russians to do pretty much anything as long as it's not to other Russians, right? Like if you're inside the tent pissing out, you're good. And as a result, they have a very, very large group of people who have actual operational experience and who are actually trained at stuff. And they will go out and they will build like, million computer botnets. And then FSB doesn't have to try and hack 1 million computers and see what's going on. They could just find one guy and say, look, here's the deal. You like having both hands. We want you to keep both hands. All we're going to say is type this and everyone's happy, right? And as a result, they have this this capability that they can tap in the private sector, which the rest of the world is like, how come they allow all this terrible crime to happen? And it's like, well, it turns out it's actually really useful. Like it gives them great cover and it generates money. And like there's literally no downside because what the fuck are you going to do, right? Like no, like what is anyone going to do to stop Russia, right? You can't. Like that's kind of the cool thing about having nuclear weapons. And yeah, like so, as one of my friends very eloquently put it, was so I met him at a conference over there, and he was like, oh, I got caught and there was a bit of a problem and it was very embarrassing. There was cameras at my house and I had to explain to my mother what happened and it was really bad. And I'm like, so what are you going to do? He's like, well, fuck you, I'm in Russia, bitch. No one can touch me. Like he just doesn't leave the country and he's cool. So that's pretty much their approach to things. As I said, the reason that they have this strategic cyber reserve is they have something which I call the covenant. They don't have a word for it because they're not Americans and they don't like to label things. But yeah, like if you're inside the tent pissing out, you're cool. There's also as long as you're only making tools, you're okay. Like no one's going to bug you if you just make tools. Whereas if you're actually operating, you might get bugged. they have unfortunately created these perverse incentives for themselves with this institutionalized corruption. And rather than telling you something that would be a secret, I'm going to tell you a parable. So, imagine that you are a gardener and your monthly salary is $100, which is a bit shit. But the guy who employs you says, look, if you ever break any of the tools that you need to use to garden, just let me know and we can buy new tools. You've got like infinite tool budget. Okay? So if you are a smart gardener, you will very quickly realize that your job is actually no longer gardening, it's breaking tools. Right? The more tools that you break, the more money you get. Like the actual payday for these guys comes when they have to buy new tools. And on a completely unrelated note, in 2015, APT29 burned 1 O-day a month, and last year they burned 2 a month. I don't know why. All right? They're very, very flexible, they're very aggressive. They use their strategic cyber reserve, and they're sloppy as fuck. And that's because of this Russian saying, which is, like, the rocket goes up, it comes down in the swamp, that's how you pay us, that's how we work. Like, you paid us enough to get the rocket up, you didn't pay us enough to get targeting. Like, that's almost it. So I could see there's people leaving. But so one of the things I wanted to talk about was passive cyber, like just pure collection, which the Americans are able to do because they have most of the internet is physically based in the US. That makes it a lot easier to do passive stuff. So they collected a huge amount. It leads to them doing a lot of man-in-the-middle attacks or man-on-the-side attacks. And it's very, very useful if all you want to do is know how the world works, which is what the Americans want, right? Like they want to have this understanding. It's not very, very useful if you want to control how the world works. But since the Americans, they kind of suck at that, they're okay with it. Whereas active cyber, you have this sort of example where you've got like WikiLeaks going, who hacked DNC? And someone else is like, yeah, I heard it was Russia. So active cyber is where you have these active attempts at manipulating the world. And I mentioned the lesson of Stuxnet from the point of view of the Americans was, we can hack anything. And from the Russian point of view, the lesson of Stuxnet was, people believe what their computers tell them. So as far as the Russians were concerned, they're like, fuck it, this is awesome. Like, if we can control what appears on people's computers, we can shape their realities. And the Americans are like, yeah, but we can get in there and we can read what's on the screen. So, you know, that's cool. And the Russians are like, yeah, but we can put whatever we want on the screen. Like, that's cooler. Or like, we can create a reality for people. And this is kind of where, weirdly enough, the accuracy, like how good your collection is, doesn't really matter all that much. Like, you don't have to be super good at cyber to be able to be super good at active measures, which helps a lot for the Russians, because they can just collect fairly poorly, and then what they put out is like close enough. So that's kind of it. The main things I kind of wanted to get across, which I probably didn't at all, but the operational characteristics of APT groups are actually direct reflections of the organizations behind that, and those organizations are that way for historical reasons, right? So like, your operational characteristics are a direct reflection of your organizational characteristics, and that's just politics and history. So if you know how that works, you know how they operate. And then you can basically compare these groups on different matrices, these like different angles, like how good is their cyber, how good is their covertness, and how close is their command and control to the executive. And you can use these these elements to basically model different groups. Are there any questions? Because I think I have literally covered in depth everything there is to know about the cyber. Thank you.
So, I heard you mention earlier about the executive report, and how in IC they just read the executive report, but I just want to report from corporate America is not much different than that. Is that the only thing that's ever read, both not only in corporate America but in responsible disclosure and everything, is only the executive report.
Oh, now it's only what fits in a tweet.
This is a systemic thing. This is not just an IC problem.
Yeah, no,
I just wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, no, like that. People are lazy. Like to quote Oleg, the former head of counterintelligence at the London Residencia, it's people. Humans make human errors.
People, what a bunch of bastards.
Yeah, like people. Like that's it's from a courtroom statement, and it literally goes, quote, quote, sigh, quote, quote, dot, 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 people, full exclamation. Like, yep. Like, when someone's like, how come it's this way? And he's like, people.
Thanks for this in-depth cyber analysis talk. It was really great, and I saw during the talk that you're really into cyber. And therefore, really have a present for you for your cyberness.
Oh.
So he will get the cyber sticker. So he will sign it with you.
Thank you. Cool, thanks.
Any extra questions? These were not questions yet. I didn't hear a question, Mike.
I gave a question. Shit, I asked you.
Yes, you are correct. That is.
That's a question.
Yeah.
Hi.
That's a question.
I'm just interested in your sources.
That is a very good question, and I'm glad.
More how valid they are and how sophisticated.
I have
a bit more impression on that.
Okay.
Because are you pitted by the agencies, and which one was it in?
I have a lot of friends, is the best way I can put it. So I have a lot of friends in a lot of places, and we chat.
In Russia?
I have some in Russia, yes, and I have more in the US, and they love telling me problems that they have with the Russians, because they're like, how could they do this? This is like cheating. And I'm like, oh, that's fucking genius. That's a really clever idea. I wish I had thought of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have experience with the Israeli intelligence work? Because it was left out, or
no, actually, my next set of slides is on Area 51. Yes. No.
Anybody else?
Oh.
Who took your Twitter profile photo? You resemble yourself.
Yeah. The Twitter profile is actually from Seven Samurai. It's from the scene where the guy who basically recruits everyone else to go and do the shit. When he's first introduced, it's this thing of like he's always been on the losing side. He's a Ronin. He doesn't have the like samurai honor bullshit thing anymore. So he shaves his head to look like a monk. And it's from a Japanese parable, basically, like the story of there's a thief who has kidnapped a child and is cornered inside of a barn. And from the point of, and he's surrounded by the village. Like the village is like, fucking thief, thief, and he's like fucking grabs a kid and runs into a barn with a knife. So from the point of view of the villagers, the thief is in a very strong position. Like they can't get into the barn without him hurting the child. Whereas from the point of view of the thief, he's in a very weak position because he can't get out without being caught by the villagers. right? And so what happens is this dude shaves his head, comes in with 2 dumplings, and he's like, look, I'm a passing monk. I just want to make sure you're not hungry. Boom, chucks the shit in his face, throws the knife out, and he's like, there you go, that's the thief. So the picture is from that, because I was like, that is like the way to approach it. Is like people are like, this is very strong, this is very weak. Like, nope, Gordian knot, just cut through. Also, it's an awesome photo. Anything else? Yeah.
So, I mean, I have now a serious question. Like, where do you think it will lead to? So, do you think Russia will be improving all the stuff and being like the lead in the APT stuff, or you think the American will lead up, or your opinion about this?
My honest opinion is I think that the Russians are doing really well and they're going to get better. And America basically just kind of needs to man up and admit they're like, yes, we do the cyber, and we're just going to have to accept that like some people are not happy with that, and we're going to just do the cyber. And that means they're going to need to get rid of their like obsession with ghosting and their obsession with never being caught, and just say like, yeah, like we did that because we don't think these are good people and we want to know what they're doing. You know, like if they get caught like using ODAs against Samsung phones being used by jihadis in, Saudi Arabia who are planning to do a terrorist attack, people are not going to be that upset, right? And that's the sort of thing that they do, but they need to just kind of like man the fuck up and, live with, that's what they do, that's who they are. The big thing is that the Russians have got a much longer history of espionage and intelligence. Like basically, before the revolution, they had an intelligence service that was called Okrana, and I have an Okrana manual, which is like a 1905. Translated from bureaucratic Russian, and it is really, really dense, but it was the basis of literally every manual that's been used by the KGB ever since. And if you read that, you know everything you need to know about espionage. And they have this very, very long tradition of using active measures, which I think is going to become more important going forward. And the Russians are just better at it. They've got more practice, they've got more experience, they've got more to draw on. So like one of the first things that happened is after the revolution, there's the civil war in Russia where there's like the whites and the reds, and basically they wiped each other out. So Russia literally had no army. Like they didn't have any defensive capabilities at all. So one of the first things that their intelligence agency was tasked with was make everyone believe that we have an army, right? So like literally from inception, they have been doing active measures to shape the reality that the rest of us live in. Like they have been trying to get people to believe things that are not true, and they're really good at it. So hats off, massive applause. They're awesome people, except. Not right now, but yeah, like they're fucking good at what they do.
Just follow on. So, do you think that China will still be the copycat in the future, or?
I think the Chinese are very, very patient, which means like from the point of view of cyber stuff, like as they're happy to hack and catch up, and they don't need to shape the rest of the world. They're like, when the world is ready, they'll come to China. Like they can just sit back and wait. Like they take a very, very long view. So I don't think they're going to be as involved in trying to shape what's happening. Whereas the Russians, like they're kind of caught up in that. And then like there's loads of other groups like the Australians who fucking hack the shit out of the Indonesians all the time. Like the Israelis are actually very, very good, but they have a very, very narrow focus. Like the impolite way to say it is beards in the sandbox. Like, basically, if it's not actually in the Middle East, the Israelis don't care that much. Like, they'll go to Europe and stuff like that to monitor people who do things over there, but they don't really care. But they're very competent, and they have lots of money, and they have a good working relationship with the Americans, which gives them access to some really good tooling.
Thanks for your insights.
Yeah.
That'll be the last one now.
Yeah. Please excuse me if this is a dumb question, but I'm wondering who's being targeted by the APTs? You just said, yeah, China, they say, we want nano, chaka, and then they do stuff. It'll be big companies or very innovative companies with much IP or everybody.
It depends, right? So that's where the targeting comes in. And so there's a lot of, I'm not as familiar with the economic espionage angle because I find it very boring. But the targeting that gets done is done via this collaboration with fusion centers. And it's like when I say collaboration, what I really mean is corruption. Basically, the generals that run the different divisions in the like 3PLA in their NSA will say, look, we've had this directive to get like big on nano. You guys are pretty fucking good at nano. How about you set up a new company and you give me 20% and I will get you all of the nano shit that you want, right? And so they have these public-private partnerships which are very, very, like it's literally a public-private partnership where individual high-up level generals will be involved in the companies that are benefiting. So they will get direct feedback. The company will be like, look, we got like everything we could out of that R&D, but there's strong hints that the small company is like innovating the fuck out of things. Maybe we could hit them as well. And the general will go like, we'll discuss this at the next board meeting, you know, and then shows up with the USB and be like, yes, you're right. They are doing innovative, interesting stuff. Now we are as well. So, like the targeting there is what I find most exciting. Like how you figure out who to hack is much more interesting than how you hack, because we know how everyone hacks. It's word macros and flash exploits, right? Like it hasn't been interesting for a decade. What is interesting is who you target and what you're getting out of it, and that's the shit that's really, really cool. And China has done some like amazing stuff there. Like the OPM hack was spectacular targeting. Right. So I'm like way over time now. So thank you very much. It was good. Thanks, man. Glad I came.